Hello again, Ancestry, cousins, and Inquiring minds. So we're still on the story of the Civil War and how it affected the people in DC, the free people of color, or any of the people in DC. Okay, so I have to make an announcement. I made an error. And you will see that I will probably make rebuttals and say I've made errors quite a few times because I'm human. Okay. So previously, because this story actually started with my grandfather, my great great grandfather, Lloyd Randolph Johnson, free person of color in DC. And I said that when he got his manumission paper, he went to the court and got someone testified that he was always free and knew them to always be free. And this was in 1858, September 1858. That same day, he signed up for the Navy. Okay, this is in 1858. So I did have the dates wrong because I think I said he signed up for the Civil War, which that was incorrect because the Civil War didn't start until 1861. So when he signed up, it was before the start of the Civil War. And just this comes from NPS, and it says even before 1861, the Navy, unlike the U.S. Army, had not barred black men from serving. Following the attack on Fort Sumner, African Americans, which they weren't called then, rapidly filled the ranks of the Navy. Within the first 90 days of the war, the representation of AAs in the Navy had increased fourfold. Say, well over a third of the Union's Navy, roughly 17,000 black sailors came from Union states, with Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York most strongly represented. So I just wanted to say that part, I had that date wrong. That's a mental note for me because these videos aren't really made for myself. I want to share my discoveries with people that may be my cousins and they can see, like, why does she have this here? And they say, oh, I see, they can find some of the things that have been hidden and I discovered. And they could maybe use those same type of strategies to just do comparisons, because really all it is a bunch of comparing and paying attention. So I want these videos to be 30 minutes so I could go back and look at what I said and make corrections, which I realized I did make a mistake with that time frame. So the Army, the Navy, they have a lot of information out there about that they actually did not bar black people from being in the Navy. So they even took escaped slaves. So, but they had to come in under a lower I guess ranking that I saw. It was called boy, which is like, and that's just like, I guess the lowest ranking, which I thought the landsman was, but I guess if you were a runaway slave, then you came in as the lowest ranking. So, and I also found from the Department of Veterans Affairs that they had put out a men of color banner request, and I never paid attention to it before. So in September of 1782, when President Lincoln did this proclamation, they made it where black people could enlist, basically, because before that, after the Revolutionary War, black people could not enlist in the military, but the Navy never barred anybody. They was doing their own thing. So that, just to make that correction, in if you had some people that you found was in the Navy during that time, you would understand, oh, that's not an error. Okay, so let's get to the newspaper articles that were on the days of the alleged scrimmages at Fort Stevens. Okay, so Aunt Betty was there. She's watching because she lives right there on the land that's right there where the fort is. They're saying they have guards at the 7th Street Pike, and they're checking people to see it. As I read that in another book or another article or something like that. So we're going to go to this article right here. The first one is from July 12th. Also, I read something where it may have been in one of the books, because I didn't share all of the documents and stuff or read the books about the fighting or the recording of how they were marching and how they were changing the information, because I didn't really want it to be so much on the military aspect of it, but more on the people that were involved in the conflict, just the locals. So the invasion. The condition of things last night, the fighting on the 7th Street Road, rebel sharpshooters dislodged the enemy attempt to plant a battery, but are shelled away. Policemen and other citizens take a hand in the fighting. The heavy skirmishing in front of Fort Stevens in the vicinity of the 7th Street Road yesterday afternoon continued until after dark. The rebels held a position in the woods from which they threw out skirmishers who crept along the road or fired from behind trees. At one time, they succeeded in getting within range of the fort, and their sharpshooters were enabled to pick off our gunners, 2 of whom were wounded. The rebels used no artillery, but their movements indicated that they were endeavoring to plant a battery to bear on Fort Stevens, later known as Fort Massachusetts. And I think previously I might have called it Fort Manassas or something, because my mind be moving. I mean, I just be going so fast. So I will make errors when I'm speaking sometimes. So please forgive and be like, there you go, mark them down. And in one order to frustrate their designs, and the fort threw shells occasionally among them, about 6:30 our cavalry charged upon them, which had the effect of driving them back some distance. The skirmishing was still kept up, however, and a little after 7 o'clock, our infantry was brought up and placed in line in front of Fort Stevens, while the cavalry deployed to the right. The object of this movement or its results was not known when we left the vicinity of the scene of this action last night. The house of F.P. Blair has not been burned as reported yesterday. The rebels appeared to be using it as a hospital, as they were seen to carry some of their wounded into it. The houses of Mrs. Reeves and Mrs. Carberry on either side of the 7th Street Road were occupied by rebel sharpshooters who annoyed our troops somewhat. During the afternoon, they picked off 3 of our sergeants, shooting them through the head. It was found necessary to destroy quite a number of houses on either side of the 7th Street Road to prevent them from being occupied by the rebel sharpshooters. Among the houses destroyed was Monsignor Richard Butts, William Bales, J.H. McChesney's, Mr. Shoemaker's, and the house occupied by the family of the late William M. Morrison. Time, however, was allowed the owners of those to remove the furniture, and the road leading to the city was lined with wagons conveying it to a place of safety. So they was getting their furniture and stuff. But I think I had said that before. The farmers in the vicinity lost the most of their stock, owing, as they say, to our pickets refusing to let the drivers pass through the lines without a permit. The farmers had taken the precaution to drive their stock towards the city as the rebels advanced, but not being allowed to enter, it all fell to the hands of the enemy. Several citizens, policemen, and others took active part in the engagement. Prominent among them was Augustus Norton, P. McChesney, and officers Booth and Beale. A number of our soldiers were overcome by the heat, as were also several citizens who walked out to the scene of action to witness the engagement. So people just going out there, they watching. Early in the evening, thousands of persons could be seen passing on 7th Street by every conceivable means of conveyance, while the road was literally lined with pedestrians. The hills, trees, and fences within sight of Fort Stevens were covered with human beings, quite a number of whom were ladies, quietly seated in a carriage around a commanding post was Secretary Seward, viewing the progress of affairs. All right, so I'm gonna leave that right there because that was the end of that one for that day. So we're going to the next day, which we're going to take the charge of the rebels. This is the same newspaper, Evening Star. This is July 13th, 1864. The charge of the rebels last night, they were driven a mile and a half. The heaviest fighting last night in front of Stevens was between 5 and 7 o'clock in the evening. While it was determined to dislodge the rebel sharpshooters who were making themselves mischievously annoying from the Carberry place, and especially from the house of Mr. Lay, better known as Carberry House on Rock Creek Road to the left of Fort Stevens. To dislodge the sharpshooters from this house, a shell sent from Fort Stevens by the skillful gunners on the 6th main artery was lodged in the capella of the Carberry houses, firing the buildings and sending the rebels skedaddling from their shelter like so many rats. This movement was followed by a charge on the rebel position by a portion of the 1st Division of the veteran 6th Corps, executed in brilliant style on the double quick, and by which the rebels were wholly dislodged from the skirmishing position they had heretofore held, and with tendency were driven perhaps a mile and a half. We lost some 3 or 4 killed in this affair and captured several prisoners. The rebels lost some 5 or 6 killed and perhaps as many were wounded. The Carberry house was supposed to have been entirely destroyed as it was burning at the last hour last evening in front of Fort Slocum on Kansas Avenue. To the right of Stevens, the rebel skirmishers were not so active, but whenever they showed themselves in sufficient numbers, the fort treated them with a shell dance. Fort Slocum fired during the day between 30 to 40 shells, and whenever they fell among the rebels, they were seen to run in all directions. The main force of the rebels kept prudently in the woods and only showed themselves in any numbers when they revived their skirmishers. Late in the evening, when the heavy fighting was going on, dense clouds of dust could be seen in the rear of the rebels, indicating that one or two things: either the rebels were falling back or receiving reinforcements. And passing along the line of our fortifications passing along the line of the fortifications from Fort Bunker Hill to Fort Stevens, late in the evening, we found the impression to be among the military folk that the rebels were retreating toward Rockville and Edwards Ferry, as the columns of dust about sunset seemed to be receding in the northwest direction. Our entire loss in the 2 days of skirmishing will not amount to more than 50 in killed, wounded, or missing. That of the enemy is, of course, unknown, but is doubtless heavier than ours, from the fact that as many of the shells thrown to the forts burst in their midst. Yesterday, the 8th Illinois Cavalry had 3 men wounded. For several hours yesterday, a rebel officer mounted on a horse could be seen riding in and out of the woods fronting Fort Stevens. During all this time, he had perfect target for our men, but all attempts to dismount him proved fruitless. Okay, so that's the end of it. Oh wait, a member of the 76th New York Regiment took a position in a tree from whence he picked off 6 of the rebel sharpshooters. President Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln passed along the line of the city defenses in a carriage last night. We were warmly greeted by the soldiers wherever they made their appearance among them. I'm going to go to the next article right quick with 14 minutes. This is I think this is a different paper. This is the Daily National Intelligencer, and it's on the July 13th, 1864. Skirmishing near Fort Stevens. One of the editors of the Union yesterday made a visit to Fort Stevens, formerly Fort Massachusetts, out on 7th Street, and gives the following account of what he saw and learned. On the road out we passed the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery and a few stragglers. Just out of the city, we met several farmers with their teams hauling into town their household furniture, their dwellings having been destroyed and taken possession by the Confederates. When within a mile of the fort, we could begin to hear the picket firing with its particular sound, like into chip chip, as though some woodmen were cutting down a tree. We soon reached a line of sentry placed across the road to stop civilians. We got by without much trouble and soon reached the top of the hill. At the side of the fort and about 300 yards down the valley, we could see the opposing skirmishers banging away at each other, at times very vigorously, then again lulling with only an occasional shot. Here we could see the ruins of the houses destroyed on Monday, so that the Confederates could not use them for cover. The chimneys were all standing, reminding us much of the burnt chimneys near Richmond, where the sanguinary tights took place up against McClellan and Knee just before the 7 days fight. The houses near 7th Street destroyed by our forces are those of Richard Butts. I can't get rid of these fruit flies when we bring bananas in here. Oh my gosh. William Bell, W. Bell, J.H. McChesney, Abner Shoemaker, and the residents of the late W.M. Morrison. On Monday, the Confederates got within 100 yards of Fort Stevens. It was only a thin line, the men being so far apart that the heavy guns of the fort could not be used against them. But the infantry in the fort drove them back, the dwellings that were always destroyed, giving them shelter. On Monday night, about 10 o'clock, while the Federals were forming their picket line on the 7th Street Road near Widow Carberry's, the Confederate assaulted them with some impetuosity and drove them back, but the line was finally formed after a slight brush. After this, quietness reigned supreme all night. After daylight, this Tuesday morning, skirmishing again commenced, the Confederates appearing in good force on the left, between Fort Stevens and Fort Debussy in Widow Carberry's woods. The gunner in the fort, 13th Michigan Artillery, threw a few shells in our direction, which had the effect of driving the Confederates out when they worked around to the right, endeavoring to get in between Fort Stevens and Fort Slocum. Here, the 1st Brigade, 2nd Division, and 6th Army Corps General Wheaton were posted in skirmish line. At first, the Federals got the worst of it, but finally the Confederates were driven back out of the field of low underbrush and bushes from which they terribly annoyed our troops. 2 prisoners were captured, belonging to the 12th and 21st Georgia regiments. They were deserted. They were dressed in gray jacket and pants and presented a terrible, filthy appearance as though they had marched many weary miles. 2 other prisoners had previously been brought in, one belonging to the 21st Virginia Cavalry and the other to the 46th Battalion Virginia Cavalry of Morgan's Corps. The Federal forces in our front are General Rhodes, General Ramser's, and General Gordon's divisions of all the immediate command of Breckinridge, who was a short time ago made a lieutenant general. These are the forces that opposed Hunter in the Valley, many of them, let's see. Upon the 11 o'clock, these skirmishers were continued the Confederates while endeavoring to reach the field of low brushes on the right of 7th Street Road. At one time, they broke cover and the Federal troops could be seen rushing across the road as though in pursuit. Soon a vigorous banging took place. Several Federals were seen to fall on the right of the road. Among them were Colonel Ballier of the 98th Pennsylvania, who was shot through the right thigh. The wound was very painful, but not dangerous. All the skirmishing took place within 300 yards of the Fort Stevens, and the Confederates occupying the house of the Widow Carberry. Several shells were thrown at it, with what effect we could not tell, though smoke was seen to come from it at a time. A large number of spectators assembled on the top of the hill beside the fort, where the breastwork of rails ran across the road. The Confederates occasionally would elevate their rifles and send a ball among them. Several stampedes was thus occasioned. About 11 o'clock, 2 men standing on the rampage of Fort Stevens were shot, one through the head and the other through the stomach. Mr. George Coon's agent and Mr. White, also an attaché of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company, were standing beside these men when shot. The parrot guns of Fort Stevens Slocum and a field battery on the left threw shells wherever an opportunity occurred. In off the distance out of 7th Street Road and at least 3 miles, a heavy black smoke was observed, and through the dwelling was a fire. It was not so much smoke for it, but a campfire. The Confederate no doubt desired to throw up rifle pits. And at about 300 yards from the forts, but those in the forts threw too many large shells among them for the comfort whenever the detail attempted to work. So when they was trying to build something, we're gonna show some heavy artillery over there. The large number of contrabands were set to work in the morning, throwing up fresh rifle pits between the forts. This saves the men from the scorching heat. The contraband is the runaway slaves. That's the large number of contrabands. We say, yeah. Wow, a large number of contrabands. We said, maybe not. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, maybe that's not in that use. Okay, maybe I don't know. While on the ground, from the several following wounded were brought in. Okay, we're gonna skip on them. Oh, they got a lot. On our return to town, hundreds of small boys and females were winging their way out in the front. Also, ice cream and cake vendors. So all seemed as though they were going to a picnic instead of a scene of blood and cartilage. To Major General Alexander McCook, the commandant of the defenses, and Lieutenant D.G. Jewett, officer of the day, we are indebted to your generous courtesies, by which we were able to accomplish more fully our purpose in visiting the lines. So, yeah. I think it's one more. And this one was the Evening Star. So basically, if you go in, what I did, because I'm not going to read them all and I've decided against it. You could go in to Chronicling America and put in what I typed in Fort Stevens in parentheses, and you put in the date range, and then it'll bring up all of those articles, and it will put Fort Stevens together, or it may look for Fort and Stevens separately, but always put the parentheses to try to keep the words together in your initial search. So that right there, like I said, I didn't read from the books of Early's account, because he had to report back to his generals what's happening and why he didn't proceed, and because he was told to push, from what I read. But when they got there, the men had been walking, they said 30 miles one day, 10 miles the next day. They was tired, it's hot, and so he wanted his men to rest. He sent out to search to see what was going on, and they was like, those works out there, I guess whatever that is, that protection they put out there, we need to have daylight, and we need to have reinforcements. And so in the city, I read to you the articles of what the newspapers were reporting. Now, oddly enough, in one of those things that I was reading, it said that Early knew, of course, from their spies, that was reporting back to them, but they also knew what was going on in the city because of the newspapers. So the newspapers had its good parts and its bad parts, because they actually was telling the enemy information that that they may not have known. It's just like, okay, let's go get the newspaper and see what's going on. So that was I think this is going to be the end of this series right here or right now. Oh, I got to go back to the original story of what I was saying about Lloyd Randolph Johnson and Walter Clark. So Walter Clark will come up in the next video because he is an officer. Well, he's not an officer. He was a volunteer. They had the conflict with my grandfather, but this is how I come to look for this story in the beginning. So thank you for watching this. That one will be the last one, and it will be about the 2nd District volunteers. Thank you for watching.